and we are coming out of sunny California with lots more tips and tricks about how to build a venture backable startup. Now, as you all know, every single week we do a combination of like two things. The first is that I am here as your friend, mentor, guide, investor to talk to you about what you need to do to be able to grow your own startup. So please, as always, make sure you are putting questions in there for things that are important for yourself and for you to be able to grow your own startup. If that's not the case, what's the point in me doing this in the first place? And the other thing that I do is I'll share with you over the last week the things that I've been doing and I've seen within our 300 or so investments that we have that have either been amazing or terrible, right? And that way you stay really up to date with what's happening within the space. And I always try and bring a guest on who's going to be valuable to you and give you information on how you are. Today, it's going to be Jordi. I'll bring Jordi on in about 15 minutes or so. And Jordi's going to give a little bit of feedback with regards to valuations and what do valuations look like and what drives valuation, everything else, which actually brings me to the place of the couple of things that I've seen over the last week and really just what happens in early startup with regards to the valuations themselves. So I've been doing this for a long time. As I said, Expert Dojo have invested in 300 startups. We've invested in startups in Africa, invested in startups in India, invested in startups in Europe, in Latin America, and also here as well. And the thing that I have noticed with all of these places is that everything is the same. Nothing changes. All of the startups are the same. And when I say the same, I just mean like the things that make you special, like what helps you grow, what are the challenges that you're facing, everything that like you're facing as a startup in Latin America. I promise you there's a startup that's over in India that's facing exactly the same problem and dealing with exactly the same investor issue and growth issue as everything else. So I always start from the same place when talking about these. And please feel free. I will keep our chat open. I'll keep an eye on it myself. Hello, Yash. I'll make sure that I keep a very, very close eye on this so that I can answer the questions that you have. But let me bring it back, first of all, while I'm waiting for those to come through on a very basic level of what is valuation. Well, first of all, at the beginning, and Jordi's going to have comments about this, but at the beginning, it's made up. And it's made up by VCs because it's definitely not based on a multiple of EBITDA, and it's definitely not based on revenue because an early stage founder might be doing $5, $10, $15, $20, $25,000 a month in revenue. I promise you, there is nobody out there, including your mom and dad, that are going to pay the valuation that you have. Whether your valuation is 7 million, 8 million, 9 million, 10 million, nobody's going to pay that valuation. That is not the purpose of placing that valuation. The purpose of placing a valuation for a pre-Series A company is to make sure that the founders have enough equity in the company to be able to move forward. That's it. That's the whole idea behind it. So don't get caught up on your valuation at the beginning. Get caught up on your dilution at the beginning. The dilution is absolutely the most important part. I've seen founders that have given so much away at the start that they're literally below 50% by the time they get past their seed round. If that is the case, chances are you're dead. Doesn't matter how good the company is. Doesn't matter how much you're going to grow. Doesn't matter. None of these things matter. Because if you've given up 50% by the time you get to your Series A, then you do your Series A, that's another 10 to 15% dilution. Now you're down to 35. You do your Series B, that could be another 10 to 20% dilution, depending on how much that you raise there. Now you're down to like 20, maybe 22, 23%, and then do one or two more rounds, and suddenly you've got single digits. If you actually take the founder of Lyft, there was actually a few founders in Lyft, but take the biggest founder in equity in Lyft, had less than 1% left in their equity by the time they got to, 4 or 5 years ago. So what do you prefer? Do you prefer to do like a 15, 20-year journey like Lyft did and then get to a place where you're worth, what are they worth, 30 billion? Awesome, but less than 1%? you kidding me? Like, it's okay, but $300 million, I'm sorry, is that like, and then after tax, that's $150 million. I mean, these guys built one of the biggest companies in America and they have that. So what would you rather do? Would you rather do that? Or would you rather dilute by like 20, 30, 40% and build a company in 3-4 years and exit for $450 million? That's the craziness here. This is why you have to be aware of what's happening around you. And remember, venture capital is a game of three things. The first is customer growth. Why do we position ourselves as one of the chief growth product people in all of venture? I think of myself, even though every single company we engage with, we invest in. There are no companies in our portfolio that we either haven't invested in or we don't have an intention to invest in. I think there's like 4 of them that we have an intention of investing in just based on warrants on the future. But it's always investment based. But that's because we just like making our money from investment. Our skill is on growth. That is where we are very, very, very good. And growth comes in like a number of different areas. It comes in outbound, it comes in your lovable product, it comes in your conversion, it comes in your personal brand that then leads to domain dominance. It even comes in your peak performance as well. And then also comes in a bunch of other areas too. And then the other part of it, so it's knowing the game. If you're going to play the venture game, you got to know the venture game. Remember, when you got a poker table and somebody sits down on the poker table and they have not played poker before, every single person on that poker table, they turn their guns on that person because that person is the easiest to relieve money from. Don't be that person on the poker table when everybody's looking for the patsy and the patsy ends up being you, right? The second thing, and that includes maintaining valuation. It includes who you have on your board. It includes maintaining control. It includes making sure that you have proper agreements with the people that are working with you on all levels. And it also includes maintaining cash flow in the company. And cash flow can come from investment or it can come from growth, depending on your plan. The second part of it is making sure that your growth is done properly. Simple as that. You have to build an absolute obsessive relationship with your customer on those same areas we're talking about. And I'm happy to answer any questions here that people have about growth. This is what I do all day, every day. Use me for that. The final piece is being really good at raising investment. Because even though we never want our founders to become professional beggars and at the very beginning to be spending all of their time raising money, I'm a huge believer that too much money destroys incredible companies. We do want you to be proficient at communicating your story so that we can throw a bunch of gasoline on the fire that you've already lit. That is because this entire venture game is a race against time. Your greatest enemy is time. It's not your competitors. It's not the big folks out there. It's time. We have one of our companies, North, who are absolutely flying right like this. They are crushing it against time. They've gone from 0 to a couple $100,000 a month, $300,000-$400,000, killing it, killing it, killing it, killing it. They're one of the best companies in the portfolio, not because they're the largest value, just because they're winning that war against time quicker than anybody else. You want to be a soldier winning that war against time. Cool. I like it, Alex. Good. Good to have you here. We like amazing startups, but most importantly, we like amazing startups who have the ability to be able to grow. And so there are very, very, very few startups that have the ability to make it to a unicorn. To make it even more difficult than that, if you look around the world, the US has not been growing more startups over the last 10 years. Not at all. India has. Africa also has not. Europe also has not. Latin America is starting to get into the game. And so building these unicorns is very hard. Remember, we're looking for companies that have the ability to get to between 1 and 10, 15, $20 million a month in revenue. That's the goal. Until a company gets to $1 million a month in revenue, in most worlds, it's not worth very much. And somebody could argue to me here, Brian, I know a company that was doing $600,000 a month in revenue and it got acquired. Okay. But that was not a great outcome, I promise you, for all of the investors, unless it was like their moms and dads and they got in very early. But for real institutional investors, they didn't. Your number is $1 million a month in revenue. That's the number you need to be able to get to so you can sit back and say, okay, we did something special, right? And so you want to be able to get to that place. Everything is about threading your way to that place. Once you start getting to $500, $600, $700,000 in my world, you become interesting. Okay, so what I'm going to do is let me throw this up here for Daniel. And then I'm going to, after that, I am going to bring in Jordi, who's probably wondering, how do I get in here? Well, after we've read a few of these, but you're going to be coming in soon. So, hey, Brian, it would be great to know what you think of seeds to succeed, considering AI made it possible to scale more efficiently and stay cash flow positive in earlier stages. Yeah, you know, so this is I'm going to look at this question like from 3 or 4 different directions. The first one is everybody has access to AI right now. And so that's a wonderful thing and it's a terrible thing. It just means that like we all have to run faster because everybody has to work 3 times as hard now to make sure that the other people don't come past us. So just be aware of that. Like AI, like ChatGPT, it's not something that only you have. Everybody else has that. And the second point is developers. We just took a developer out of OpenAI and they were getting paid $5.6 million a year. So, okay, you need fewer developers, but your developers have to be much better. And now you've got like jackasses like OpenAI and other folks that are paying so much money to their people that they've literally priced everybody else out of the market. So for that 5.6 million people, I could have got 15 people before. Can't get 15 people now. Now I can only get 1 person. So sure, I can do it with fewer people, but those people will be at a lower skill set because all of the really good people have been taken from it. So I'm not saying it's not possible. All I'm saying is there's never been a customer in the world that has woken up in the morning and said, I really wish I had more AI. It's not a thing, right? They just want transformative product. And a lot of the time we can get distracted away by shiny objects because they just happen to be very topical today. And suddenly our whole deck becomes AI, 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 AI. But the real secret here, the one that everybody has to follow to be successful, is transform your customer. That's all, transformative impact. If you're having transformative impact, I swear to you, the right people will be attracted to your organization. And that will bring in the AI and it will bring in everything else because everybody will see you're winning. People are attracted to winners. They're not attracted to losers. They're attracted to speed and growth. They're not attracted to wasteful spending. They're attracted to huge vision that's overcoming massive problems. They're not attracted to a lot of bluster. And so, yes, of course, AI is amazing. AI is going to do great things. There's already organizations that are building on the back of it, but really everything is about your growth. I work on, and I'm going to bring Jordi in immediately after this, but look, I just work on one number. And that is the number, that is the percentage of growth that you have right now. It could be the percentage of growth this year to last year. It could be last year to the year before. It could be now to next year. It could be based on the revenue numbers, or it could be based on the user numbers, right? But it has to be based on a measurement which is from your customer. If you are growing at 200%, and I've said this before, you get a unicorn by default. And like, does it really matter? Let me even come at from a slightly different angle. 20 years ago, this stuff really mattered because a unicorn was like, I mean, even though technically this isn't correct, but let's say a public company was $200-300 million. Like that's what Microsoft went public at. That's an amazing outcome. And when that's an amazing outcome, it really matters how much money you raise, and it really matters how effectively you use that money, because what's the point in getting to a $200 million valuation if the company has like had to get $150 million to get there? So now let's look at the market we're in right now. We have $1 trillion companies. We have Coinbase that went public at $100 billion. Doesn't matter if you have 5 people, 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, not so much, as long as you can show that you're on the right trajectory. And so, yes, make sure that you maximize efficiencies as much as you can. Make sure that you grow as fast as you can. But bear in mind, if we've gone from the biggest companies in the world back in the time of IBM being worth 100, $200 billion to the biggest companies today being worth $1 to $2 trillion, it is not inconceivable that in 5 to 10 years, when you are exiting from your early stage companies, that the largest companies in the world will be worth $10 trillion. And look, if you even have 10, 20% left of your company, of a $10 trillion company, you have more money than most countries. So yes, AI is useful, AI is good, but AI is not everything. Right, let's bring Jordi in. Jordi, good to have you in.
Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My pleasure. It is good to have you here. Let me pull this bad boy off, and then let's talk valuations. So you are a specialist in valuations, which is wonderful. I think it's like it's an amazing skill to have in the early stage space because it's so nuanced and so thing. And you heard the first 10 or 15 minutes that what we were talking about. That's a very schizophrenic thing to say. And so you got the first part of this where you kind of got an idea as to where my mind is, at least as far as like valuations. Can you share a little bit about yourself and just your background in this space? And then let's just talk about valuations, like structurally, and then also valuations like in people's minds.
Sure. So I've been obsessed with cooking probably as long as I've been obsessed with valuation. So it's been almost a couple of decades now. And Brent, do you cook at all?
I suck, but my wife is like the most amazing cook in the world. She's Spanish, and because like I got into a Spanish family like a long time ago, I recognize the Mediterranean love for cooking. I do.
Nice. Yeah. No. Absolutely. And what if I give you a recipe? Would that be helpful in you kind of like getting to where you need to be, making some really good tapas?
Yes, yes, in the right environment, right? Which is was so interesting. So it's true, but yes, of course.
So the reason I bring this up is because in my mind, cooking is a little bit like valuation. And if you're not a great cook, and it sounds like maybe your wife does some of the cooking, having a recipe is extremely helpful, right? So I feel like some of the conversations that I have and some of the conversations that I read about and the books that I read about, it's all trying to find that recipe that can help me in my growth phase as a startup. And there are tons of different recipes, right? There's probably you know 30 different recipes on how to make shrimp, but the idea is that if I'm following that recipe, I'll increase my likelihood of success. What's the issue that a recipe doesn't tell you? That you might burn your fingers and you might cut your finger doing the cutting for the onions, and when you go in to put the recipe, it falls over and your partner gets angry at you because you've been quarreling for 3 hours, right? And I feel like that's what business is. Some of the recipes are out there. I think it's wonderful that you're putting out this information, but at the end of the game, the entrepreneur is going to have to do the hard work, and they're going to have to all go through all of these ups and downs that come with starting a business, with growing a business, and with maturing a business.
Yeah, and by the way, I really like this analogy because even you go to the supermarket and there's 300 tomatoes, and so based on which tomato you choose is going to have a direct impact on the recipe that you have as well. I also think from an investor perspective, like if I'm inviting 8 people for dinner and say, hey, I'm going to be cooking the meal, it's going to be great. The person coming to dinner is going to want to know, they won't want to know, but their judgment would be based on, have I ever cooked a meal before or not, right? And so that's very like a startup. Like to the whole recipe is, okay, cool. You're gonna like make us the most beautiful meal we've ever seen, which is going to be a unicorn meal or like worth enough to get a financial return. Have you actually ever done a startup before? Like, what's your basis for this recipe and knowing that it's actually going to work for you? And then to your point, like there are periods while in very much using the analogy for startup growth, it's like cooking a paella, right? The paella might take 4 to 6 hours to make. And you can tell as it's being cooked based on the skill of the person who's cooking the paella. So literally the fire has to be on first for a period of time. And that could be the pre-seed round for the startup. And depending on like the heat that you have the fire at, it tells a lot as to your skills and knowledge with being able to cook the perfect paella. And then when you're creating it, then you have the rice, which needs to be cooked separately, then the fish, which needs to be brought in, and then they need to be combined. So there are stages of cooking, and all of these stages give clues. Where do you buy your food? How fresh is your food? What do you do with regards to the preparation of the actual cooking when you're there? Where are you storing the food that's there? All of this is your team, your skill set, the product that you're going after, the market size that you're going into. And then when you say to everybody at the beginning of the meal at like 1 o'clock, look, guys, it's going to take 5 hours to do this, but let's have a couple of beers and enjoy ourselves in the meantime. Like, but I promise you, within an hour, we'll be putting the fish in. And if in an hour we're not putting the fish in, something is not as we told people before. And so all of those, it's a super analogy for this. Like startup is exactly that. And
Yeah,
people are watching. Investors are not idiots.
it's amazing how you're absolutely right about everything. And at the end of the game, if there's an investor that's allergic to shrimp or is allergic to rice, right, that's not the right investor for you, right? So I feel like we can take a lot of parallels, but I just wanted to preface the conversation by kind of saying that, right, that you're going to hear a lot of advice as you grow as a company. And it's not that it's not helpful, it can be helpful. It's just that you still have to do the dirty work.
Yeah. And so, folks, everybody, as I say, most folks, like everybody who's listening to this, they want to maximize their valuation in the right way. And so I give two examples of that. But I think there are some companies that will get a 50 million valuation and other companies which will get a 10 million valuation. We actually had one of our companies the other day that was raising a Series A about a month ago, was raising a Series A, and they could have got 120 million from one investor as a valuation, and they said no. And then they ended up taking 100 million as a post round from a bunch of investors. And they did it for two reasons. One, they didn't feel they were worth 120 million. And I just thought that was very, very, very mature for them to be able to say, we don't want to have a down round in the future. We want to make sure this thing, it's not about getting the biggest valuation at the start. It's about getting to become the largest and most valuable company that you can become at the lowest cost. And so you have that on one side of it. And then on the other side of it, I see companies raising like $1, $2, $3 million valuations at the beginning. And I think, man, these guys are great, like super founders, great technology. They're early, so they're afraid, but that fear is coming through on the valuation. Like, how do you, when you're working with founders, I know it's more of a science as you get past Series A, and it's more of an art at the beginning, but how do you combine both?
So the first thing is to understand, like what you said, valuation is a future thing, right? It's about future cash flows. And so you're always trying to think long term on value maximization. The people that obsess about value maximization at stage one are forgetting that it's a longer game, right? You're running sprints when you should be running a marathon. And so you have to have first that mindset. I think second is that valuation is a little bit less important. I know I'm a valuation guy, I shouldn't be saying this, but valuation is not so important at the very early stages. What you should really be focused on is how much money do you need and what's the least amount of equity that you can give up to achieve that. And so you want to strike a balance between giving good upside to your early stage investor, right? You never want to give your early stage investors 5%, 1%, because they're going to get so diluted over the years that it's not going to be worth it for them. And so you want to follow some of those conventions, right? 15 to 25%, 20 to 30%, wherever you feel in your industry makes sense, but also take the money that you need. And I think I've heard multiple people say, you think you need 2 million, you probably need six. And so maybe give yourself a little bit of a cushion. But I like what you said about that company that said, I think 120 is pushing it. That's a little too much. Let's take a most sustainable approach. Let's figure out how to do the first steps in the right ways with less money. And then once you've trialed and error, then you can continue to move on. And I feel like as an entrepreneur, that trial and error is extremely important. If you're the type of person that can run certain sales modes and certain processes and test them before launching them at a wider scale, you're going to be ahead of a lot of people. And that works from D2C, that works from B2B SaaS, that works with any large company. Sure, biotech is a little bit more unique, but they're also running tests, right, on early stage molecules and on the programs that they're running. And I think the more tests you run, the more you validate an idea, the better you'll be long term.
Yeah, and I really like that advice of starting at the end and work your way backwards. Like you don't want to be the Lyft founder who's got less than 1%. Like you want to have the maximum that you can possibly have without being silly. Okay, so if you start in the back and you work forward, if you give up 30, 40% of your company in your seed stage, you might as well close your company down because you'll never make it. You just won't have enough. At one stage, investors will stop investing because they just won't feel that you have enough in the company to actually be successful in the company going forward. So that's going to happen as well. And talk to me about like different industries and even different verticals and different distribution models. Are you seeing SaaS? Like, so we obviously we saw 2021, which 2020, 2019, 2021, where things were a little bit crazy, right? And valuations went very high. And I think it's the same nature of supply and demand, right? There were so many investors coming into the market. They went after startups really hard, and like everybody was a winner chicken dinner in investors' minds, and the valuations just went up. But then we had this huge drop over the last 2 years or so. Can you talk a little bit about like maybe just what's happened from a professional's perspective and like where you see the rest of 2025 going to?
So, I mean, most people have probably heard this, but when money is cheap, when you can invest a lot of money into hyper growth, people will do it. And you saw it with the B2B SaaS craze all throughout the 2010s and into 2021, like you said. And people, I think, are starting to realize that maybe growth at all cost wasn't necessarily the right answer, that there should
Mhm.
have been a little bit more emphasis on sustainable growth. Because if you think about a business, the value is in cash flow, right? If you're never profitable, if you just focus on growth, if you're buying customers at whatever price they have, it's not going to be a sustainable business. And for example, again, B2B SaaS, you always talk about CAC versus LTV. It also applies from D2C, but you're looking at how much do I have to pay for that customer and what is the lifetime value of that customer. And those equations were getting too close in the hyper growth mode that we saw before. And I think investors are starting to learn a little bit that lesson. The other thing that's happening, and I think you've spoken about it before, is that we had this kind of spray and pray method, trying to find the companies that were going to be billion-dollar companies, trillion-dollar companies one day. And now people understand that that isn't necessarily the right business model, right? We're funding companies in a way that's a little bit unsustainable, where we're only pricing the winners, we only want monopolies. And some VCs are going to continue doing that, but others are starting to see value in creating sustainable businesses that are 100 million, that are $500 million. There's a lot of acquisitions that can happen. There's a lot of strategic growth. We're seeing the big older players start acquiring early stage technology a lot more. And so we are seeing the options of taking exits that aren't necessarily those $1 billion IPO exits only. And I think that also gives the industry a little bit more sustainable focus and a little bit more of that, don't bet everything on a single company.
Yeah, and we saw that a lot. Look, 23andMe was a great example where at the time there was such hype around 23andMe because of like the person who launched it, because of the person
Mhm.
that surrounded her, that the valuation went sky high, company went public, and nobody really asked the question, well, is a one-time purchase company like a good future financial model? And the answer was no, right? And of course, they had the breach, which was bad luck, but the breach then directly tied into a weakness, which had people asking questions that they maybe wouldn't have asked if they didn't have that little bit of weakness. And so it's also about bulletproofing your future valuation based on real numbers. Like that's the real difference. I even saw it, look, in the electric car space. I was with somebody who is one of the big electric car people recently, and it just reminded me of when the electric car vehicles came out, and they were like, there's one of them. They were making their product in Austria. Like that was never going to work long term. There was the other one that was, but they knew there was never like. Look at what happens with Nikolai. with the electric trucks, and they had to pretend that the truck was moving by pushing it down the road, and then in the YouTube video speeding it up, because there wasn't neither the infrastructure for electric trucks nor the potential for the infrastructure for the electric trucks, nor was it even good value compared to what was being done right now on gas or on diesel. And so there is a very, very, very different bar today than there was before. If this was 2020, 2019, you have a great idea, you have a great vision, nobody cares. People will invest in you. Today, everybody who's listening to this stream, especially, you guys have an advantage over everybody else because it's an equal playing field. But because it's an equal playing field, you got to have it real. Like, you have to have thought through, how do we find the customer? How do we secure the customer? How do we keep the customer happy? And how do we get the customer buying? How do we show that a five, six, seven, $800 acquisition cost, which is higher than ever before, can be offset by amazing outcomes that we can get from the repeatability that's in there as well.
And
Okay,
I'll
I have
just
a Sorry, go on. You jump in there, Jordi, and then I'll throw this
no,
question.
I'll just say one quick thing. But I think we're at an incredible point in time to be an entrepreneur. I think, 15, 30-person teams are going to reach insane valuations. You're going to have the ability to be almost a solopreneur with a couple of folks helping you and become $100 million company very quickly. We're seeing the acquisitions actually taking place by Microsoft and OpenAI for companies like Windsurf. We saw the curve that somebody like Cursor went through, which is explosive, in all with very small teams, right? Lovable.dev, incredibly small teams. And for me, that's super exciting, right? I think I always dreamed of a world where you could run a company and grow a company with the leverage that you can have today. And we're seeing that dream come true. And so I feel like being an entrepreneur at this crossroads, sure, hyper competitive because everybody has the tools. And at the same time, great ideas will continue to rise. And most importantly, great customer service and great product market fit. And if you're focused on that, I always tell people, if you're an entrepreneur, just remember that your title is really chief sales officer, right? You're going to be the chief sales officer. You're selling, selling, selling all the time. You're the chief recruiting officer. You're always recruiting new people. And you're the chief resource allocator. And so you have to sell your vision to every single piece that you're allocating so that people lift behind you.
Yeah. And I do want to get to like the structure of how valuations are done beforehand. I'll just make one comment and then maybe we'll answer this question.
Sure.
The valuation moves from art to science, definitely. Like, there's hardly an analyst in the world that doesn't know how to analyze Microsoft or Apple or valuations, and your companies would do valuations like all the time for these folks. At the beginning, it's an art, right? Because people are basing a lot of it on, to your point, like those future revenues that can come through. I believe the most successful startups are the startups who can move art to science the quickest. Simple as that. The quicker you move art to science, because that science is just pure math. That's all it is. How many customers are there? Where are the customers? How transformative are you? How sticky? How long do the customers stay with you? How much did you pay to get them? How much are they going to pay you? What additional add-ons do you have? What percentage of them take the add-ons? To your point, how many people do you need to provide the services to actually keep these customers happy? What's the next level the company can go to? Can the company hit $10 million a year, a month in revenue? Like, this is the math. Like, that's where it goes to. And so I'd love to get your comment on that. And then I want to dig into this question, which is the Pakistan. I like that. It's very one-sided. It's probably true, to be fair, but I like the Pakistan aggravation against India. Would you like to fund startups that are enhancing defense systems? So it's speaking specifically to the point of what is hot in investors' minds. So I also have a view on that as well. But
Okay,
could you
sure.
just speak
So
first of all
yeah,
to
so
art
let's
to
let's
science?
let's take it from the back. So one of my favorite valuations professors is that Aswath Damodaran. He's an NYU professor, and he talks about this where when the company is much early, you have story as the major driver of valuation, and by the time you get to the later stages, you're absolutely right. With something like Microsoft, numbers are really what tells the valuation. So I like to think about it a little bit in that continuum, but I also like to think that a story is a better story if it has a lot of de-risking points. What do I mean by that? So when you're a startup, your job again is to de-risk your future. And so how do I do that? If I ran, for example, if I'm running a D2C company and I run a series of target ads and I'm seeing incredibly good conversions with $1,000, I want to test it at $10,000. I then want to test it at $100,000. And if I'm seeing that same fuel, like I'm seeing that same conversion rate and it's staying and I'm seeing the wide open market, that's a great opportunity to take a conversation with someone and say, hey, I need $10 million because we've proven this 3 times that every time we 10x the spend on ads, we're seeing the results, right? That to me is de-risking. So to the extent that a company can de-risk their story, like you said, we're gonna create these amazing things. Well, how are you gonna create it? Well, I spent 20 years actually creating this for 3 other companies. My co-founder has been an entrepreneur, and this is his third company, right? All those points start adding to the de-risking, and so that story becomes more and more real. And so while it is an art and it is a story, and we're relying less on the numbers, I always believe that traction and tests and repeatable processes are what de-risk startups and give them a lot of value.
Well done. That's brilliant. And what's your thoughts on that question about Pakistan and India and war? And is that a good time to go after a defense type product?
So I think the defense spending has always been a major contributor to technology. It's unfortunate that sometimes we're using the technology for bad, but I think the good outcome on that is that, well, one, you need defense in certain countries, and second, that you're creating a lot of technology that may be useful elsewhere. For example, drone technology can be transferred to a lot of future transportation systems. If you're creating certain combustion systems in missiles, you can also transfer that into combustion systems for energy delivery. And so I think there's always a little bit of a side benefit. And I think if you have at least both angles in your company, you still may be very successful. So if it's the time, because we're seeing potential risk in the world and we're seeing more world tension, then it could be a really great time to invest in defense systems.
Look, I am dogs are awesome and humans are douchebags. Like that's generally my baseline, right? And so because we're a bunch of douchebags, we spend our entire history and future just killing each other. That's what we're really good at. And we see the tensions all around the world. And so I don't think like Pakistan, India matters to that extent because you could argue there's like 4 or 5 wars happening in the world at any one time, and we're on the brink of a world war at any one time, and we probably will have one within the next 5 to 10 years. And so for that reason, like defense will always be really popular. More importantly, is that what happens when a conflict begins, or even when there are tensions in the world like there are right now, is that countries start looking at what is the latest thing that we need. We know drones are super popular for lots of reasons with defense, and whoever has got good drone technology, which has got precision, whatever, is going to have an ear that's going to listen to them. So
Mhm.
unfortunately, I think defense will always be really good. You just have to show that you're special. It's just everything brings me back. Look, right now, we're heavily leaning into data centers and compute space for the same reason. It's just we know there's like a 10, 20-year window where compute space is not going to be less popular. It's going to be more needed. The world is going to go to an entirely compute space area. I think it'll be like food, water, compute space, and defense. Maybe not in that order, but those four are going to be the major things that people are going to be looking at. And so, yes, you should do. And I think just as importantly, if investment is a big part of it, having it very topical is really important. So when you have something really topical, you go hard after it. So like if I'm in the US right now, am I killing myself for electric vehicles? No, because we know the administration just doesn't give two hoots about electric vehicles. So it's not a time where investors are going to see an immediate return. I want to talk about the next question because I think this is a fascinating. Now, I have a perspective on this. Jordi, I don't know how well you know these guys. We looked at them and we didn't go into the diligence room, so I'm not going to talk massively about them, but I am going to say what I think happens to a company. So why did 23andMe die? It wasn't just the fact that they had no other product. If they hadn't been breached, then they wouldn't have lost trust. And if they hadn't have lost trust, they wouldn't have been perceived to be weak. And if they hadn't been perceived to be weak, they wouldn't have got destroyed. These guys are the same thing. Look, I don't know if you've seen the apartments that these kids had. Beautiful. They had a number of different companies that were all sourcing and supplying each other, and it was extremely difficult to tell what numbers for which company. They had a beautiful lifestyle, and as soon as there was one crack on this whole raise, they lost trust and they got destroyed. Do I think they can survive? No. Do I think that Blue Smart will survive? Yes. I think somebody else will buy them. I think they'll buy them for dimes on the dollar and they'll come back out again. Do I think that the world desperately needs an electric vehicle only pickup service? No. But do I think it's useful and a really good feature inside one of the other services? Yes. But the basic principle is when a company just grows, and there is not absolute regard. Like, I don't even pay for a dinner if there's no business related to it because I don't want anybody picking on this stuff. So when I'm sitting in Delhi looking at the most expensive apartment building in the entire place, and I'm hearing that one of the penthouses or one of the top apartments is owned by one of the founders of a company that the only thing that they do successfully is lose money, what the fuck? Like, what's gone wrong with the world that like that bullshit is okay? So, might they survive? Sure. Do they deserve to survive? No.
It's all about trust and it's all about a long term game. I think entrepreneurs sometimes forget that you're playing a longer term game. This company may not succeed, but if you earn the trust of your investors, if you learn the trust of your peers, if you earn the trust of your industry, you can do it one more time. You can maybe do it three more times, right? As soon as you start losing that trust with the community, you're almost handicapping yourself for the rest of your life and the rest of your businesses. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that you want to make sure that I think as a consultant, right? I've been a consultant my whole life. You always got told, don't drive into your consultant with a Range Rover wearing a Rolex and a $300 shirt because they're going to think they're paying you too much. And sometimes it's just perception. You just don't want to give off that vibe, I guess, into the community. But it's the same with entrepreneurs and founders, right? As soon as investors think that you're spilling money in ways that don't fully look right, again, this is going to go public very quickly, and people are going to lose not only trust in that business, but potentially for your future businesses as well.
Yeah, you can't mess with money. And people do. And by the way, just because it's well documented, what Adam from WeWork did and other folks did out there as well, the only reason that Adam is even in the game, whether it's with A16 or anyone else, is because SoftBank were silly enough to give him that $1 billion. If he hadn't got that $1 billion, that kid would have been a pariah and nobody would have ever spoken to him again. But he had the money, which allowed him to play the game again, right? But for most founders, if I have a founder, and by the way, it's the same for me with LPs. If I abuse LPs' money by either not caring about it enough, not thinking about it enough, think about this. Look, other people worked really hard for this money. Somebody did, I promise you. It's not that it's like a rich person who wants to be less rich or who feels that you deserve it so you can try out your dream. They don't give a shit about your dream. They want a return on their money. You are a return vehicle. And when you speak to them and you talk to them, that's the way you're talking to them. Those founders that are like that, they get to try a few times. I have other founders that have lost our money, and I'm really happy to back them again. I love those guys. They're fighters. They're going back into the ring. I actually know that each time I back them, I come a little bit closer to a guaranteed amazing outcome, right? But no, these I'll even take them off my stream because I just think they're such a joke. And they were dealing with such an important area back then, and they messed it up. Trust, 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 trust. At the beginning, exactly what Jordi just said. At the beginning, when you have only thing you have is that story and the belief that you are the protagonist of that story. If you lose that, it all crumbles and there's hardly any way to ever come back. Similar thing happened. I remember when, oh gosh, who were the ones who gave away free movie tickets? Movie Pass, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It was, They sold an amazing story, but then they just kept giving away movie tickets, which they would like give away, even though they were buying them for $10 or $15 or something. And then people would pay a monthly subscription of $9.99 or something ridiculous. And there's a while, even though they didn't take money, they didn't do anything bad from what I know, but it's just wasteful and it's stupid. Like, at what stage do you realize your model is not going to work? So you need to show a couple of things. You have to show this is the early stage. And after this, I want Jordi to finish on what is the structure for valuations? Why are 409A valuations necessary? When should startups be thinking of these and plans and everything else? And I haven't gone into that too much, but I think if we leave 5 or 10 minutes to go through that, Jordi, we can leave people with some real nuggets to go away. This one here, very quickly. I'm a startup founder, new to these topics. How do I start with funder and eventually evaluate funding and evaluation? Is like, listen to these podcasts. That's it. That's all we're talking about, my friend. So listen to the podcasts. When somebody feels that your valuation can increase on a yearly basis, and they're going to get a better return because you're valued at X times more within a period of time, that is the time for people to invest in you. The rules are it has to be a venture backable startup. You have to be able to scale to be worth tens of millions or hundreds of millions. For guys like us, it's hundreds of millions and billions. For maybe your mom, your dad, your friends, people around you, maybe it's tens of millions if you start off being valued at 1 million. But anybody in early stage startup that's not looking to make 10, 20, 30 times return, they're not an early stage startup. They're a novice and they shouldn't be allowed to play the game. For everybody else, we're expecting you to get to $10,000 a month as quickly as possible. And then we're expecting you to grow up between 100 and 300% growth every year. If you do that, then you're 10 to $30,000 a month, you're 30 to $90,000 a month, you're 90, let's say 100% to 180 a month, you're 180 to 360, 540, you're at 540 a month now with 200% there. And then another little 100% gets you to 1,080,000 a month. And you've done that within 5 years. That's the game. Simple as that, right? Doesn't mean you can't grow at 50% one year. It doesn't mean you can't grow at 150%, but you have to be on a trajectory of 100% plus, or you are not a venture backable company. Now, the good news is the reason you get a valuation is so you can raise money in the meantime. And that allows you to put juice on top of the fire so that the fire burns more brightly and so that you can grow faster than you would normally grow. That's it. Jordi, talk to us about 409A valuations and share options and just maybe top
Sure.
five like dumb, stupid things that we all do as founders.
So I'll say two things. One, figure out quickly the incentives in your business and your industry, because in the movie pass example, right, the incentive was for someone to make their money back. It's like the buffet kind of example. Sure, it kind of works sometimes, but you're putting a lot of risk in a process that, it may not be as repeatable as you think every single month, because slowly the people who are paying and don't use it, they're going to drop off, and the people who are power users are going to maybe even double down and bring their dates with them. And so the incentives are perverse in that sense, and your company is doomed to fail. So definitely not a process that you want to throw money at, because again, the incentives are misaligned. In the same way, incentives in a company work that way. And so if you have salespeople that are incentivized correctly, for example, not capping their commissions, you're going to see them want to sell more. And if they make more money on higher sales, they're going to want to sell even more, right? And so I always talk about incentives as the way to put everybody on the same lane. And they have to be natural, and they have to take into account some of the more perverse ways that people work, right? Because they're trying to maximize their own payouts as much as the companies, but mostly on their own. So just align them. In terms of 49As and valuation, we stress the importance of 49A because equity as a founder is your absolutely most precious resource. Sure, you may be able to sometimes pay market rates, maybe a little bit below market rates, maybe a little bit above market rates, but let's assume market rates. But people aren't joining your company just to have a job. Startups are stressful, they're messy, you're gonna have to wear a lot of hats in them. And so people expect upside. And you, as a founder, have to sell that upside, have to sell that vision. And how do you do it? By giving people equity. And most Series C, Series A will allocate certain percentages to the option pools. And so you want to make sure that you're fighting for that, because that's the way that you're going to be able to recruit talent and retain talent. And again, it's all about the incentive. So if people see the value in your company and feel like that equity is going to be worth millions of dollars in the future, they're absolutely willing to give up the dollars today. So 49A is a great way to start managing for value and not only for growth. Because if people are seeing great growth, it looks great, but if you're completely ignoring the other side and it's never going to be profitable, they're going to see right through it. And so again, always that balance of let's shoot for growth with a sense of creating value, not just for growth's sakes. So think about sales, but think about profitability, think about your expense structure. So if you start early and you value your company, you set a stake in the ground, and then you can manage from that point onwards. And so going from 1 cent to 2 cents doesn't seem like much, but that's 100% increase. And so whoever got options in year one sees 100% increase by year two. That feels good, right? And that's probably going to incentivize me to continue doing a good job, to continue working for the company, to continue to focus on the long term. And so what I tell founders is make those stakes in the ground and make sure that every year you're at least flat, maybe going up, right? There's going to be some ups and downs, but make sure that you're communicating to your employees at the right times and in the right ways so that they feel that even when there's a flattish area, even when there's a little bit of a downturn in your valuation, that you're still doing it because you're investing in that moment and that's going to have a future payoff. So as long as that story makes sense and as long as you can prove that we have the process, etc., I think people are going to align with you and they're going to realize that there's a process that you're following, that there are valuations that you're putting forth, that these are independent, that they're IRS related, that they're real, and then they'll trust you even further. So measure for value, manage for value, and you'll also, when you're doing this exercise, build a blueprint for how you want that future to look. As I mentioned, value is really the future, right? It's not what you've built, it's really how what you've built produces cash flows in the future. And so when you're thinking about those valuations, you're probably going to have to do a forecast. You're probably going to have to model certain scenarios and certain outcomes. And by doing that, you're building a blueprint and a foundation for your business. If you're driving on your own and don't have a GPS, right, you're probably going to end up somewhere you didn't want to end up. But the more that you start driving that car towards that final endpoint or that future goal that you're setting, the better you're going to do. And if on top of that you have the maps and you have the tools and you know how to follow the road, you're going to do even better, right? I tell people you're sitting on a plot of land when you're an early stage founder, and then you're going to have to build a house or a building or whatever else that you're building. But if you don't have a blueprint, if you don't have a set of guidelines on what you're going to build, the odds are that it's going to be a disaster.
I like that. Really, you're talking about going from crayons to markers on a board, right? And that's that art to the science piece. And I really like it because what you're talking about is, look, you have to get to the science piece as quickly as possible. Sure, there's probably no point in doing it like when you're pre-seed and you have nothing.
Mhm.
But as you start building, you start getting revenue, you start getting customers. You need to have people coming into the company to get share options. You need to have investors that are going to be coming in on the company, and you need to justify your future value. And so the 409A valuation becomes really important. I will finish just with this. Look, we've got a nice question there from Yash. Yash, I'm going to save that for next week because it's like a whole topic on its own. 0 to 1, 0 to 100. My God. But for everybody else, we'll see you all back next week. And Jordi, can you just share with people how they can contact you? So whether it's for valuations or for advice on valuations or anything around that.
Absolutely. So the best place to go look for me is on LinkedIn. So my name is Jordi Pujol, Jordipujol. You can find me on LinkedIn. I also have a newsletter right now. The series is called Weapons of Mass Value Creation. I always play with the names and the stories that I tell. Sometimes I just post on LinkedIn, but I'm throwing out a lot of small nuggets that hopefully are helpful for the community. And I work for a company called Objective. We're a boutique investment bank out of Southern California, objectiveibv.com. You can look for my page and information there as well. And obviously, there's always my email, jordi.pujol@objectiveibv.com. And I'm always happy to take calls to help others just understand how to value things, how to think about value. If you're too early, you may not need a formal valuation, but if you're issuing equity and you're issuing options, then that's a great time to begin this process. And we not only do 498s, but we help people with IP transfers, with legal and tax matters, financial reporting matters, and any type of strategic decision making in which they need a valuation to make a better decision.
Yeah, and this stuff is important. By the way, Kishle just put your details up there on the screen as well. This stuff's important because look, I know it feels, and I'll leave us all with this comment, and then wish you all a great week and go out there and sell lots, build valuation, raise money. And but at the beginning, when you're building a company, it's very much from your heart, right? You found this big problem that you got to fix. You brought together a few like-minded people who want to fix that problem. And the only thing you're focused on is how can you make it beautiful? That's all. But there's a moment when you go from being worth absolutely zero, when all you're worried about is beauty, to when you get to a place where the company is worth $1 billion and suddenly everybody in the world has got an arrow pointed at your back. And there is a point somewhere in the middle of that where you have to start protecting yourself and moving from all I care about is beauty to moving to what I care about is creating a great organization which is protected so that the beauty can prevail. Okay. And that's where Jordi comes in and all of the things he's talking about today. So you have his details. Reach out. Anybody who's got any questions, they're mentors and experts in our brain trust for our portfolio. So very, very happy to have them on the show here. And for everybody out there, as I said, just go out there and build big. Okay. That's all I got for you guys. I'll see you all next week. Thank you, Jordi. An
Thank you
absolute pleasure.
so much. This was great. Much appreciated.